What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Tanner Farmstead podcast. This is episode 2, and I'm really excited about this guest, Farmer Froberg. His first name's Tyler, correct?
Yeah, it's Tyler. A lot of people don't realize that, but it is
Yeah.
Tyler.
Well, I get that. I get that a lot. People call me Tanner, and I'm like, well, my first name's actually Derek, but call me whatever. It works. But super excited to have you on. I appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast, and really excited to hear your story. I've got a lot of really good questions to ask you, just to get your opinion on farming, on growing food, and as a content creator out there as well, like what you're doing, I love that, and as it's a passion for me to create content about growing food, whether that's on the garden scale or a larger scale like y'all are doing. So thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, man, I'm happy to be here. Always, always excited to talk shop. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's so important not to go on my first soapboxes because there will be many soapboxes in this talk.
That's
But
what I want,
like,
man. That's why I've got some good
yeah,
questions for you.
we as growers, we again, you hit the hammer on the nail when we talk about a spectrum of growing, no matter the scale. Generally, we're all growing by ourselves, and so getting to talk shop isn't necessarily something we get to do on a daily basis. So I get super pumped for it, man.
Yeah,
Super excited to
definitely,
be here.
man. Well, I appreciate it, man. Tell me a little bit. I know we were talking earlier, but just for the listeners or anybody watching this, where's your farm located, and how many acres do y'all currently have in production?
Yep. So we are located in the Gulf Coast of Texas, Southeast Texas, specifically Alvin, Texas, which its claim to fame is we put Nolan Ryan on the map. This is the birthplace of Nolan Ryan, the famous Texas Ranger baseball player. Uh, and so our acreage under cultivation varies. We're also extremely diversified, but generally we teeter around the 300 acre range. And so I always like to say there's a spectrum of agriculture, right? And that spectrum starts with the apartment renter who's got like a single container on their back porch and maybe like a pet dog.
Yep,
And then you have everything in between going to the very large corporate industrial ag, right? And so we fall somewhere in the middle there. There's a lot of things that do make us different, and I know everyone says that, and mainly because a lot of family operations like ours are different. Um, but the things that set us aside, uh, not only our location, because we live in what's called rice country, and so growing produce here is a very odd thing. Um, but we also retail 100% of what we grow. Now, hasn't that hasn't always been the case. We wholesaled produce for almost 100 years.
mm.
But currently, as it sits, the year is 2024. If you're listening to this from the future, as it sits in 2024, we retail 100% of what we raise from right here on the farm at our retail center.
And is the retail center on the farm?
It is right here on the farm. So you actually,
Wow,
um, it's a long story. Our entrance used to come in on the south side of the property. It now comes in on the north side of the property. So you actually drive in through the farm. Like you drive in, we have a giant asphalt fenced in driveway that drives through the field, or one of the
that's
fields
cool.
that takes you into our retail center. And so our retail center, I know if you're thinking, especially if you're from like produce areas like the Northeast, where like you have this produce culture in the late spring and early summer of like farmers markets and farm on farm markets and all that kind of thing. I know
Yep,
what you're picturing, but we've toured places like that. So what we like to say is times that by about five. So
yep.
our facility, our farm market here on our farm is about I don't know, 1,000 by 800 is our building size
So it's
approximately.
big.
It's
It's real
big.
big.
It's big. We like to refer to ourselves as a like a small family owned grocery store when we're talking about the farm or when we're
Yep.
talking about the farm store. because we don't just sell what we grow, we sell other goods. We bring in things like dairy products and supplemental produce. Other little farms in our area. We have little goat farms that we work with and sell their goat milk candles and popsicles and stuff like that. And then
Totally.
the biggest thing that sets us apart, aside from our on-farm market, is our involvement in agritourism. And so, essentially, as produce farmers, especially when we were wholesaling produce, um, the budget was really, really tough every year. Um,
I
Everything
bet
was about the
at
bottom.
wholesale, man.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, at wholesale it's
it's
tough.
hard. And so, at the turn of the century, my grandfather passed away, and my uncle took over the farm, and it was like, how do we take the farm in the next direction? Now, back up a little bit. My family has always done a form of agritourism. So my family migrated from Germany in the 1890s and landed right here in Alvin and started
Wow.
farming strawberries. In 1936, my great grandfather bought this farm. So we were on the other side of Alvin before that. In 1936, he bought this farm. In 1942, World War II broke out and all of his farm help got drafted. So, not knowing what to do, he took an ad out in the Houston Chronicle inviting all of the housewives to come and pick their own strawberries. And so, we always like to say we've been doing pick your own like way before
It
it
was a
was cool.
thing.
We were
Yeah.
doing, yeah. And so, we've done pick your own for the last 87 years.
Wow.
Um, and so, but in the year 2002, my uncle took it to the next level. He in one season turned us into the largest strawberry farm in Texas. He cultivated 40 acres of strawberries, which doesn't sound like a lot. I always like to put it into reference. So like it doesn't sound like a lot if you're doing things like cutting hay or raising calves or like you know what I mean, something or row crops like soybeans or cotton or corn. But
Yes.
to put it in perspective, to work 40 acres of strawberries, you need 60 laborers.
Yeah.
You need 60 people to do that. And so, put that into perspective with something like cattle, right? That would be like having 6,000 acres of cattle. Right?
Yeah.
So it's just
That's a lot of
the
strawberries.
scale. The scale is very different. So he grew it. That put the farm into this ability to host a lot of people, right? But there were challenges with it because you still had to wholesale a lot of berries. 40 acres is a lot of berries. And so we were still wholesaling, and then you get caught in this wormhole of of not being able to get out of wholesaling because it's just a financial wormhole. And so then he decided at around 2010 to double down on the agritourism. And so he did the first corn maze on our farm. And so since then, in the last 14 years, all of these agritourism things is our bread and butter. So we do, um, we start in the spring with our strawberry festival, which involves pick your own strawberries. Um, then we go in the summer and we do our watermelon festival, which is hyper focused around our homegrown watermelon. And then we do our fall festival, which is hyper focused around our corn maze. And then we grow a ton of flowers during that event. And so we do pick your own flowers. And then we move into our Christmas trees. We raise Christmas trees. So we bring people out for a Christmas festival where they get to cut down their own Christmas tree. And then in the middle of that, our farm stand acts as a hub. It's open 7 days a week, 360 days a year as a community grocery store and hub for those agritourism events. Um, in addition to that, we raise all the seasonal produce to feed the store. We raise eggs. Uh, March 1st of this year, we will get back into broilers. We got out of raising meat chickens about 5 years ago, so we're going to get back into raising meat chickens. And then I actually have a sow that's farrowing right now. And so I'm going to go out, like, as soon as we're done with this podcast, I'm going to go check on her. And so, because we raise a little pork. Um, but we typically space our farrowing out just to, we don't need all of our meat at one time. We would prefer that those butcher dates be spread out.
Yeah.
Um, so we have a lot going on, right? We're
I'd say
extremely
so. Yes.
diversified. But we have a really, really solid team here on the farm. Uh, Multiple specialties, right? It is just me and my uncle and my wife as far as family members on the farm. But in terms of our staff that works for us, just fantastic. Um, yeah, that's Froberg's farm in a nutshell. That was a really long explanation to explain what we do.
Well, no, that was honestly what I wanted because it helps us kind of get into like some more of the other stuff. So really the agritourism and which as we know, and I know that a lot of this is the agritourism piece. I feel like has gained a lot more popularity even amongst really small farmers like what we're doing. Um, but the beauty of that is the agritourism is a separate income stream, but at the same time it's bringing people to the farm that then shop at the marketplace or the
Correct.
farm grocery store. So how much? I mean, would you say? And you don't have to share exact numbers. I'm just curious. Like, is a good amount of income produced from the agritourism, or is that just kind of a piece that gets them there to purchase? At the marketplace at the grocery store.
Yeah, and so yes, of course, about 70% of our income is directly the agritourism. And
Yep,
then that other 30% is entirely influenced by the agritourism.
completely.
Um, right. And so like we we are making sure that we are doubling down on greens in the month of October because there's going to be 100,000 people here, and
It's
only
crazy.
half of them have to leave with one bunch of turnips. You know what I mean? And we do always like to say we're farmers, right? For we're five generations into this. That's what my degree is in horticulture, and so the agritourism supports that farming habit.
Yep.
That's what we always like to say. And I say that to say it is possible for anyone listening. It is possible for you to do this for a living. It is. But you're going to have to make lifestyle changes if you choose to just raise produce or farm products and sell those farm products, right? It comes with lifestyle changes that you have to be comfortable with. What the agritourism allows us to do is is just to not be sweating bullets all the time about, dang, can we pay that light bill this month?
Yeah, man.
Because we got a heavy rain and we just had to throw away 14,000 pounds, or we had to feed the pigs 14,000 pounds of strawberries. You know what I mean? So which bill isn't going to get paid this month? And so
Yep.
the agritourism just ensures that it's like an insurance policy almost. It just ensures that we don't have to financially struggle during those hard times as farmers.
Yeah, that's such a good point too, man. I mean, and of course I have. I mean, the scale that y'all are growing at, it's very diversified. Obviously, I know that comes with all of its own challenges, but y'all have grown it to that point. But for someone like me, it's like I can wrap my brain around it to an extent, but I know it's a big operation. And like you said earlier, it's like 40 acres of strawberries takes a much larger operation than even 1,000 acres of corn that can just run a combine. Like it's there's just two different worlds. Um,
Yeah,
so
and each one of those things. So whether you're growing 1,000 acres of field corn or 10 acres of strawberries, it's two entirely different skill sets too, right? Like as I sit today, I could not go on a combine and harvest 1,000 acres of corn, right? It's not a skill set that I have. Could I probably figure it out with some training and learning? Of course. And we could teach someone to raise strawberries, right? But it's just two entirely different things. And I guess that's with anything, right? It really is. Cause I even always make the argument that like, while I make these fun tips about like gardening because I'm a vegetable farmer and stuff,
yeah,
I would probably struggle in a setting where I have a 10 by 10 area and I have to choose what to grow in it and how to maintain that. Like
yeah,
that is something that I would probably struggle with because it's not a skill set that I have to flex often.
100%, dude. You know, I get it. Like I would be frustrated if I had just a small area and it's like I can't grow. I can't grow this
Yeah,
year. It's like, no, that, I would feel pretty frustrated. What are some of the big, what are some of the big challenges that you'll face? Obviously with the scale of 300 acres, but just in general, like what are, maybe that's a pest issue. Maybe that's,
sure.
I'm just going to shut up and let you answer the question.
Yeah, so there's going to be multiples here. I never like to just give one answer. Um, and so the first thing is like, of course, consumer misconceptions. And so there's several facets to this. The first facet is that, well, we have more than 10 acres, so we must have crop insurance on everything we raise, right? Specialty crop insurance, if you are not working with like under a contract growing situation or with really large wholesalers, um, or with a specific government program that helps evaluate those specialty crops is pretty much unheard of and not a thing. And so there's like this misconception that like, oh, if you have to go out, we just did it so we finished yesterday. We got 10 inches of rain in 3 days and it ruined 90% of the strawberries we had in the field, and we had to go and pick all of those and dispose of them, or like I said, supplement them and feed or what have you. But like there's nothing that covers that bill, right? And there's this
Yeah.
misconception that like, well, farmers have crop insurance, so you'll be okay. Well, and while there are programs that we could go and claim losses and things like that, what it doesn't do, especially in our retail setting, is it doesn't cover that loss of retail income. And so there's just these misconceptions there about like what types of programs are out there, um, and which ones people are actually able to use. Um, and then a step further, consumer misconception. We are not a certified organic farm.
Yep.
Some of the things we use on our farm, like some of the products we use on our farm, are certified organic. Some of them are not. We always
Yep.
like to say that we're growing in the most sustainable way possible that we're able to do in the Gulf Coast of Texas.
Which is tough.
And which is tough. And
Yeah.
people have real problems with that. And so, you know, trying to educate someone who has solely made up their mind is tough. And in some cases, it's just not our responsibility. You know, if someone, there are individuals who come into our store and they find out that our strawberries are not certified organic, and they say, I refuse, and then complain to us, and we're like, look, like, there's a Whole Foods in Houston. Go
Yep.
to their organic section and, pay for the strawberries there. Like, I don't, why, why is it that you feel the need to come into our home and say, well, I, this is ridiculous. Why would you grow them this way? Well, you don't
Yeah.
have to buy them.
100%. And it's not like you're putting a Facebook post out there saying, "Hey, we have organic strawberries. Come buy them." It's like you're not
Not at
claiming that.
all. Not at all. And in our supplemental produce, we carry as many or certified organic. And I always like to make that determination that like I could not call anything on our farm organic, right?
Yep.
I can't do it because we're not certified organic. It doesn't mean that that product wasn't raised organically. It just means I cannot use that word because we are public front facing. And if we use that word, all the certified organic organizations are going to come to us. And so
Completely.
I always say, if you are asking if we are certified organic, no, we are not. We do not have our organic certification. And,
Yep.
people always ask the reasoning for that. And for us, it's just not worth it, right? These consumer misconceptions that I'm talking about are pretty few and far in between, right? Um, and it's just not worth it. I am not worried about making an organic section in a wholesale setting. People are able to come into our store, talk to us face to face. I always say, if you want to know how I raise them, just come sit on the tractor with us for a day, you know?
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. So on that piece, I'd love just to hear, because that was actually one of the questions I had. So this is segueing perfectly into it. Like, what is, and I want you to be as honest as you, just share your opinion. What's your opinion
Yep.
on the whole organic versus non-organic, argument that people have out there?
Yeah, this is one of those deals. Um, no, so first and foremost, I stand by whether it be on personal preference, on religious preference, on dietary restrictions. We as Americans have the privilege of choosing what we eat. And it is a privilege. It
Yep.
100% is a privilege that we have the opportunity to go into a grocery store or go to a farm market and pick and choose what we eat. And I believe in that right. And I think everybody should be applauding that we have that right. And I don't think that right should be taken away, right? Uh, what I do think is that everyone should be completely and utterly educated on what each individual label means. And I'm not just talking about certified organic here. I know that's what you asked me about, but I always feel like it's about the bigger discussion. Uh, my conversations usually don't stem into conversations about growing practices, mainly because growing practices differ from region to region, from area to area, and it's just so vastly different, the problems that all of us encounter and the solutions that we come up with. And so it's not as much about growing practices as it is about the labels that are on food and what those labels actually mean.
Yeah.
um, and so, this is, I say all this to say, this is not all, when I make a statement, it's not a blanket statement. So when I say, like, well, conventional farms do this, it doesn't mean all conventional farms do it. If I say, well, organic farms do that, well, it doesn't mean all organic farms do it, right?
Yep.
Just means some of them could. And so, you know, I'll start with organic, certified organic. A Organic food generally has a much higher carbon footprint because oftentimes we're doing more light cultivation, because even in no-till situations we can still lightly cultivate the top of the soil to rid ourselves of weeds. And
Yep.
so um, oftentimes our carbon footprint is much much higher. All right. And so um, why, if everyone is so worried about our carbon footprint, why is that not a certification attached to organic food of, okay, hang on, if we're so worried about carbon emissions, then we really really need to start metering the carbon emissions off these farms. And if you want to, you can get this certification, this food label that says, look, we grew this food and we did it by only emitting this much carbon emissions, right?
Yep.
Because you know essentially the whole reason that herbicide was invented is, or I should say, synthetic herbicide, because we certainly have organic herbicides that we can use. um,
Hmm.
Liquid ammonia, um, uh, vinegar, fire, these are all organic herbicides that are definitely being used when you buy organic produce. And so um, the whole reason for a synthetic herbicide was an herbicide that would have longer lasting effects so you didn't keep burning diesel, thus reducing the carbon emissions. And so, I, oftentimes with food labels, there's just so much that's actually happening, right?
Yep.
Because, like, we can all agree on, like, yeah, we need to reduce this and we need to reduce this, right? But, like, we have to draw a line somewhere, and we all have to understand what are our priorities for the environment, what are our priorities for long-term sustainability, and let's roll with that. Let's do that. Instead, unfortunately, what we've done is we've fear-mongered and categorized food, and in some cases created shame with food, and it's drawn hard lines for people. And I don't like that, man. I really, really, really don't like that. Um, Even
Yep.
with, like, labels for non-GMO. Um, Scrolling through the grocery store the other day, there was a sign for okra, one of my favorite crops to grow, and it says non-GMO okra. And I'm like, well, no crap.
I know. I don't get me
Uh,
started. The non-GMO label makes me laugh because
It
I mean, I
does.
I understand and you could correct me because you're probably more knowledgeable on this than me. The only thing, for example, like let's take grains for example. It's like okay, with a non-GMO label, really the only and I could be completely wrong on this. This is my understanding of it because I'm not in the grain realm. Um, the only thing you're going to really avoid is a Roundup Ready grain crop, like a Roundup Ready soy or corn seed. Am I correct on that? And then really
No,
the only thing.
there's some other ones. There are
Okay.
some other ones. We have there is a there's other crops so BT. This is a really good one, and I hopefully anyone who is really interested in this subject can appreciate this. So BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a
Uh huh.
naturally occurring bacteria. Caterpillars hate it. So
Yep.
any caterpillar that will can affect most of your crops, they hate it. In certified organic farming, it's sprayed on everything, right?
Yes.
So everything you eat that's certified organic, and again, I'm saying that because remember my statement before that I'm not saying that everything. I'm just saying that every farm, every certified organic farm is allowed to use BT,
Yes.
um, and more than likely are, especially with crops that are affected by different caterpillars. Uh, so corn, for example, has BT ready corn, and it produces BT naturally. And I say naturally, I know I'm going to get my head cut off for that because it was a gene that they planted into that corn's genome. I get it. It's not doing it quote unquote naturally. Humans made it do it, but it's producing the same thing that is being used on organic farms. And so, um, and so you people just have to ask themselves, I am all for food being labeled non-GMO. Okay? I am because again, I think we have the right to choose what we want to eat.
For sure.
Is what I'm not for is food that has no genetic modification ever done to it being
It's
labeled
labeled that.
non-GMO.
It's a marketing tool.
It's
I mean, that's just people think
idiocracy.
it's healthy.
It's yes, it's idiocracy, right?
Yeah.
Just like just like almond milk. I again, we have people with dairy restrictions. We have people with dietary restrictions. We as food producers, it should be our goal to provide them with a safe, healthy supplement to that dairy product, okay?
Yep.
But soaking milks in water and then adding corn syrup and sugar and some preservatives and selling it under the label milk, I don't think is okay. I am
Yeah.
perfectly fine with almonds soaked in water, right? It's a once you start adding the corn syrup and the sugar and then marketing it as a healthy food, I'm like,
Oh, and all the
guys, like
gums, all the gums they had. I mean, dude, yeah, the
it's
plant milks are most like 90% of them are trash.
yes. And again, I'm okay with this idea of a dairy supplement because there's people with dietary restrictions and especially if you could get it made fresh and it's literally milk it's literally almonds and water. I think it's fantastic. I think it's great. These people can enjoy. I love milk. I drink probably 3 to 4 glasses of milk every day, right?
Yeah.
And I want someone with dairy restrictions to be able to enjoy the same thing that I do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think they should be allowed to call the product milk. I think that's really unfair to dairy producers. And I don't think that they should be allowed to just shove corn syrup in it and sugar and all the gums and preservatives and market it as a health product. I don't think
Yeah.
that's should.
Well, that's the crazy part within all the food is like, you know, there's so many labels that are used to market the product to make the consumer think or believe that it's a healthy product. I mean, we know that. I mean,
Yep.
anything packaged is like that, you know. So from your perspective, and I think you explaining this too and talking about it from your perspective, I think that in our world, and even me at times, like you know, it can become such a black and white issue of just like it's so clear, and here's one side, here's the other, and like here's the exact way to do it, and I think it's just a little bit more complicated than people think. And I
It
mean, really,
really
we're
is.
we're growing annuals, like, and even if you want to look at it from this perspective, like we are growing annual vegetables that don't necessarily like that doesn't grow naturally in nature like the way that we're doing it. Like we're battling a lot of things, but we're feeding a lot of people.
Yes.
Um,
And so
and
oftentimes, this is when we start creeping into the word sustainable, right?
yeah,
Because if we, okay, if we wanted to say, oh, you know what? No, you need to be 100% sustainable farm. Okay, so you're telling me that as my consumer, if you're from my area, you're going to eat live oak flour, like acorn flour, you're going to eat pecans, and you're going to eat American beauty berries because those are the native fruit producing crops that we can grow here. You're not
yeah,
going to do that, right? You're not going to adjust your entire diet to a native diet. Look, I would love that. I think that that would be the coolest thing ever. I will rip everything out. I will plant 100 acres of American beautyberry. I will plant American elderberry. I
yeah,
will, I mean, we'll go crazy. We'll be out here picking dandelion greens. Yeah, you're not going to eat like that. Like the amount of people who are actually eating like that is so small. It's
yeah,
unreal. And so when you come to a farm where I am intentionally growing non-native crops, like you have to be okay with some of the not entirely sustainable practices. If not, if you're not okay with those, then you need to start eating native foods, and that's all you need to eat. And once you can come to me and say, look, my diet is 100% native foods, then I will say, okay, let's sit down and have a conversation about how we can be more sustainable on the farm.
yeah. Well, and I mean, you too. You got to. I mean, you have the other side of that too, from just a business perspective. From a farm perspective, you got to grow stuff people want. It's like I don't care if all I want to grow is a certain crop that I think is cool. Like if no one's buying it, like I have my business is not viable.
No
I'm
one's
wasting
buying
my
it, man.
time. And
That's right.
at the end of the day, like yeah, the actual people that are eating 100% native and they're not eating grains, they're not eating any, like there's just no one doing that. Let's just be real. If there is, it's like, I mean, we're talking 0.0001% of the population, if that.
And again, I want to meet those people because I would, oh my gosh, can you imagine it? Can
It'd
you
be cool. I'd love
imagine?
it'd be awesome.
Oh my gosh, like a field of bison and they're grazing on nothing. They're being rotationally grazed on nothing but native grasses. And we're having a bison steak with a side of dandelion greens and some roasted American beauty berries, some uh, um, some bread made out of acorn flour mixed, I guess, mixed with robin eggs. I don't know what was our native bird here? Turkey eggs, I guess.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah. I
guess
mean,
what
it's, go
obviously
ahead.
I'm being kind of silly, but my point to that is saying like before people are so quick to judge how quote unquote sustainable a farm is. They're acting like it's just a line. Like if sustainability was a grade, you're either getting an A, a B, a C, a D, or an F, right? And it's just not the case. There's so many variables and different things. People drive past our farm and they see strawberries. We plant strawberries on plastic.
Yep.
And so for anybody listening,
Dude, I'm with you. Go ahead.
yeah, for anybody listening, essentially what it is picture a raised bed, and instead of it just being made out of soil, it's covered in plastic. We then poke holes in that plastic using a really cool tool called a dibble wheel, and from there we either direct seed something into that hole or we plant a transplant into that hole. Now we do this for several reasons. The first and most important reason is we do it so that there is absolutely no herbicide, whether it be organic or synthetic herbicide, used in our growing space. We understand that this is something valuable to a lot of people, and it reduces our herbicide budget, which is really important to us. And, and so that's the first reason. The second reason is most of that crop that we're planting on that plastic is strawberries. We plant strawberries in October here in the state of Texas. If it gets a little chilly in December, as soon as the sun hits that plastic, it heats those plants up,
Yeah.
right? Third reason is it keeps the berries clean. People do not want to eat dirty strawberries. And so it also keeps them bacteria free, right? Obviously, our soils for the most part are clean. I'm not trying to fearmonger anybody, but things can live in our soil. And so it's why we have food safety plans on farms. And so that plastic helps keep that food much cleaner than it would be if it was sitting directly on the soil. And so it also helps trap water. So we use drip irrigation on our farm, which is the most sustainable way to water vegetables. Um, and that black plastic helps retain moisture in that bed. But when someone with absolutely no experience in agriculture who watched a
Mhm.
Netflix documentary, who pulls up to our farm and they're like, we're not going to shop here because plastic is bad. And what they didn't see was the 2 seasons of cover crop on that field. One of those seasons, we were grazing our pasture raised chickens on that cover crop. Um,
Yep.
and that plastic is allowing our growing to be much more sustainable than without it.
Yep.
Um, and they automatically make a decision. Again, the spectrum of sustainability is not a simple grade of you either passed or you failed, right? There's just so many variables and there's so many things that people don't see that go on a farm that add to that sustainability of that farm.
Such a good point, dude. I mean, that's because, I'll get it on comments of mine of like, you're growing in landscape fabric. Like, you're growing in plastic, which, I mean, you've seen our stuff. Like, we're ultra small scale compared to what y'all are doing, but I get the same thing. Like, oh, you're using silage tarps. You're using tarps and you're growing in landscape fabric. Yeah, for a lot of the same very reasons you just mentioned. We don't have to
Exactly.
weed, which for one is just labor. Like, in order for us to stay in business, like, I mean, weeding's terrible. Like, and we would have to
Exactly.
hand cultivate if we're going to weed. The same thing you said. It actually holds in moisture, and this is an argument my mentor's made. He thinks that it keeps the soil biology closer to the surface of the soil as well, because think about in the middle of the summer,
It,
that sun's beating down on it, and
yes,
it's
correct.
shading the soil until the plant fills out and at least could shade the whole bed. But that takes a
Correct.
while, depending on what you're
So
growing.
that's something people don't understand, and I didn't know how deep you go in on this podcast, but most of your soil microbiome is not UV stable, right?
Yeah.
And so again, we go back to the native talk. If you want me to grow an orchard of American beauty berries on a bed of Dallas grass, then yeah, this isn't a problem. We wouldn't have to use plastic, right? But you want strawberries, right? Which means I need exposed soil, which means I need to cover that soil somehow,
Yep.
right? And straw, I've had arguments made for straw, against straw, whatever. We do use straw sometimes in our middles. We really like it. But there's problems with the straw too. Don't get me wrong. Uh, in some cases, the straw can be sprayed with a selective herbicide that can. It won't always kill the strawberries, but if it touches the leaves, it can damage it. Um, but again, there's all of these reasons, and I'm like, it's just immediate. Plastic is bad, you
Yep.
know.
Well, that it's the person that's saying that and I get from an outside perspective looking in, and maybe you're just learning about some, agricultural practices. Like you said, maybe you've seen a documentary and you're like, oh, I can't believe they'd use all that plastic. It's like, you really have to look at it from the grand scheme of things. Yeah. Do I want to use plastic or grow in landscape fabric or use silage tarps? No, but I mean, the pros far outweigh the cons. And to me,
100%.
again, for us, it's like, man, I can have a solid sharp that lasts 10 years. And like the amount that can help protect my soil, that can help, just a lot of things. The landscape fabric, again, like you were saying, retain moisture.
Hmm.
It's so easy, I think. And believe me, I've been done it as well. It's so easy to be like, no, this is the way you have to do it, or you're doing it the wrong way because you're doing it this way. Now, do I think, and I'd love your opinion on this, like, do I think there's maybe farmers out there that they could care less about any type of sustainable practices or trying to improve to make things more sustainable? And I know that's such a buzzword. There probably is, but that's any industry you're in.
I
I'd love
agree
your thoughts on
100%.
that.
Yeah, so we go to a lot of conferences. Uh, we don't have a lot of time to go. Generally, like this month, if you're listening, we're in January. Um, Generally, January is our busy conference time because it's the one time of the year that it's slower here. The strawberries, they're fruiting, but they're not like in full swing, so we could step away for a few days. And we're having these conversations. Now, of course, the people who are generally at the conferences are the people like us who are continuing their education, they're wanting to learn. But yeah, everyone has to understand that um, the people who own this ground, people who are making their living from the ground, they want to continue to do that. And the idea, again, I'm not speaking for every single person involved with agriculture out there, but the idea that someone wouldn't do something and just not care and just be like, nah, smoke it all. I don't care, right? Chances are, if someone is doing something, they're probably doing it for a reason. They could have been misinformed. You know what I
100%.
mean? And
Yep.
I'm not defending every single person out there who made a really sorry, environmentally wrong decision. But what I am saying is that most of the time, and 99% of the time, that uh, all of these people, they we care about our ground. You know, in most cases, it's been in their families for generations, and sometimes it is about furthering education. And I can tell
Yeah. I
you
mean,
that
yeah.
on every single multi-generational farm that I've stepped into where the people um, were are my age or my generation, I should say, right? They're coming up with me. We're stepping into the leadership roles on our farms. This is the conversation, right? And ultimately, the consensus is that um, right? Great grandpa had a hard go at it. Great grandpa was using a mule and a plow, and with his last dying breath, signed a note on a tractor, right? Grandpa used the tractor, but did it with ways that his dad did it. So he tried to
Yep.
become more efficient with the tractor, but his ways didn't evolve with the times. And then that generation after that, the generation that came before myself, was the ones who said, no, we're going to do this. We're just going to go crazy with it, and started using all of the new technology. And then, of course, when I refer to technology, I'm not just talking about electronics. I'm talking about fertilizer. I'm talking about herbicides. I'm talking about fungicides. I'm talking about insecticides. Right? These were all new technologies that were released in this generation before me's lifetime, and
Yep.
in their minds it was this is this is how we grow profit margins on our farm. This is sustainability, because if we're not financially sustainable, then we're not sustainable, right? If we're not financially sustainable, we're not at all. We're
Completely.
nothing. Yeah. And so then the consensus of like the next generation coming in is, okay, did we, did we lean on a lot of that stuff a little bit too much, right? How much urea, 4600, do we actually need per acre? Um, there's just a lot of conversations being had today. And now, obviously, I'm in we're in our own little world. We raise pasture raised chickens, and we cover crop. We're not no-till. But again,
Man,
this
that's,
is this
yeah.
is
I
a
mean,
this is a
I'm
region,
with you,
right?
dude.
What people don't understand is like no till practices is more of a regional um, uh, technique, right? And it should be done in in those regions where it should be done. And other areas do benefit from light tillage in most cases. And so the consensus of producers in my generation, in my opinion, is yes, we sustainability needs to be at the forefront: financial sustainability, environmental sustainability, and then of course the sustainability of our industry. And that has to be the priority. And now how we do that, of course, many people think many different ways, but ultimately that is the priority.
Yeah, dude. I mean, and that's the thing is just like you're saying. I mean, I think that most people do. something the way they were taught it, and they're trying to improve it. But just as anybody, like when you've been doing something for 20 years and somebody tells you, hey, there's a little bit different way to do it. I mean, it's like, I mean, we all get kind of, I don't want to say stuck in our ways, but to change something, I've been doing it this way for 20 years. Like, what do you. Don't come in here and tell me to do.
That's right.
Um, but at the same time, I think as technology has grown, as we've learned to understand soils more, and you know, the biology in soils and the way soils work and the way
Hmm.
the fungi and and the bacteria and the list goes on. It's pretty fascinating. So, I mean, there are some minimal things for the listeners. It's like, yeah, there's some proactive things we can do, like keeping our soils covered, using cover crops. Which
Hmm.
y'all, it sounds like y'all have done is using some animals to go over maybe a spot where you're eventually going to grow some annual vegetables or produce. There's a lot of those types of practices that I think across the board farmers can utilize, and some of them just may not be because they're
Absolutely.
just like, man, I've been doing this forever this way, and I'm not going to change it. And
Yeah. And to your point, oftentimes it's scalable either direction.
yeah,
We can scale it in any direct, up or down in most cases. Um, and so here's how we and other family operations like ours tried to break the cycle of, well, we've always done it, right? The kids have to leave the farm. Now they got to come back to it. You got it. Somebody's got to come back to it. But we had to leave the farm. And so I joined the Army after I graduated high school, and I was stationed in Washington State. Well, while I was up there, I worked at a sheep farm. All of a sudden, I'm getting these experiences that I mean, we showed an FFA and 4-H, so we had livestock, like quote unquote, like show animal experience, right? But nothing like this, right? All of a sudden, I'm exposed to this relationship of soil biology and livestock, and this farmer was pretty talented farmer. He was very much using rotational grazing, high intensity rotational grazing,
mm-hmm.
um, and we used herding dogs. That was a big focus of the farm is
Will you
training herding dogs.
will you explain real quick what high intensity rotational grazing is for anyone
Sure,
listening that may not understand what
yeah.
that is?
And I apologize. I try to define stuff as I go. I get caught up in the moment too,
Oh,
especially
dude,
when
you're
sharing
you're
old
good. Believe
stories. And so,
me.
okay, so here's the idea, and oftentimes these examples, and I'm not a rotational grazing expert, so anyone who is, please drop a comment. Right, but the idea, the best example is bison, the American bison, right? And so, the American bison, hundreds and thousands of them in a herd, right? We're talking about uh, giant herds of these. Just
Yeah, I can hear you now. You're good.
okay, so giant herds of these huge creatures, and what they would do is they would go into an area and they would eat everything that was there. And once and they would drop their manure there and their urine there, and then once everything was ate and exhausted, they would move on to the next area. And they wouldn't, in most cases, they wouldn't come back to that area for a year, right? It would be like their next trip around that area, they would come back to it. And so what uh what farmers, and this isn't something new, right? This is something that has become new and mainstream producing, especially with social media and stuff, and sustainability being at the forefront. But this is definitely isn't new. I always like to preface with that, like, this is not new concepts. um
Yep.
what we do, uh and I can tell you how we do it on our farm. I can't speak for other farms. We raise all of our life. I'm sorry, man. My phone keeps ringing.
Oh, you're
And
good, dude.
so
You're
we
good.
raise all of our livestock this way. So pigs and chickens, what we do is we take 1,000 land hens and we put them on a quarter of an acre, right? It's a quarter of an acre that has a mobile chicken coop in it. We call it an egg wagon. You can see the full build on our YouTube page. And that gets moved every 2 days, sometimes 3 days if the forage is of really high quality. And so essentially, in a year, it's kind of like having 1,000 chickens on 50 acres. Is kind of what it comes down to. Those calculations could be off. Don't like directly quote me on that. But what we do is those chickens and or those pigs or what have you, they eat everything that's there, everything. In the middle of that, they're dropping manure. Their water is overflowing, adding moisture to the ground. Right, there's all this stuff happening, and then we move them away from it. And in general, on our farm, that ground will rest for about 90 days. In that 90 days, the most incredible thing happens, right? Because we essentially just dumped fertilizer all over this ground. The grasses that really benefit from fertilizer, which are generally the grasses that you want, grow very quickly, thus choking out a lot of your what most people would consider weeds. And it's resilient because it's been fed a tremendous amount of nitrogen as well as some other nutrients. As you've also increased your organic matter, thus increasing your water holding capacity. So not only are we seeing quick growth, we're seeing drought resilience, and we're seeing the overall quality of the forage increase. And so then when we come back, we do the same thing, except now instead of 2 days, we get 3 days out of it, right? And then when we come back, it's even thicker and it's even greener. And we can do this with almost all species of livestock. And there's some added morale benefits to it and moral benefits to it. Like our animals live outside 100% of their lives. Now, this isn't the case for all pasture raised animals. Of course, if you're north of a certain line, and the weather gets bad enough, we don't want these animals outside for their well-being, right? But where we are in the Gulf Coast of Texas, these animals are outside for 100% of their lives, which is a big value to a lot of people. And so we're increasing organic, long story short, we're increasing the organic matter of our soils. Um, we are getting some disturbance in the soil, which, no-till has kind of given disturbance of the soil a bad name, but we actually do want our soil disturbed a little bit in the right way in most areas, right? And so,
Yep.
yeah, that's the whole idea of this high intensity rotational grazing.
Yeah, great
And so
explanation.
And so back to where we were, I was on this journey. I was in Washington working on the sheep farm, and I'm like, there are benefits to the ground from this. Like, there are definitely benefits to the ground from this. So then
Yep.
I come back, I work on the family farm for a little bit, and I decide I want to go to college. So I go and get my degree. And then when I get out, I was an agriculture science teacher at a high school for a short bit, but then I got another job at an organic farm. So we were raising organic produce. As well as doing some other philanthropical things. It was a nonprofit. But again, learned a whole bunch of other stuff and then came back to the family farm. So I was gone from the family farm for about 8 years. Um, and and I think I don't know how big of an ag audience you have, but anyone who's listening, like this is extremely important for if you have the next generation coming up, they need to go see other things. They need to get training. Doesn't have to be college, obviously, but some sort of training, either on another operation or a trade school or something, um, to bring that knowledge back. That way, you continue to grow.
Yeah. I remember. I think Gabe Brown in his book Dirt to Soil, he kind of talks a little bit about that concept as well of like, you can come back on the farm, but you got to go. You got to get out, learn
You
other
got to go.
lessons, do it. And then yeah, if you want to come back to the farm, you can come back. um,
Exactly.
and which is probably pivotal, I think. Even especially for men, I think to kind of have to go out a little bit on your own and learn your own lessons. I don't know. I feel like uh,
So good.
I feel like it's just a part of growing up as a man too.
I do. And not to go too deep on this, but I also feel like I don't think that I would have I don't think that I would be viewed the same way in my family
Mm,
as if I would have stayed. Right? If I would have stayed, I would have always been the pesky little nephew that never left the farm.
yeah,
Right? But I was able to leave. essentially build a resume and then come back and say, no, 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 this is the value that I'm bringing to the farm, right?
Hmm. So after that experience and all those learning experiences working off or on other farms, did you bring some of that back and like, hey, let's start rotating some animals like this, or were y'all already doing
Yes.
that type of stuff?
Yeah, no, so the farm had no livestock whatsoever.
Okay.
Yeah, before I came back. And so um it's not so if you watch my social media, it's not necessarily something that I show a lot just because
Hmm.
my platform was kind of built on fruits and vegetables. Um but a lot of what I do with most of my day is with livestock,
Okay.
specifically chickens and pigs, specifically our chickens and pigs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. It's it's good to it's good to have a perspective from someone that's doing this at just a larger scale. And I think that even my takeaways just from this time have just been, I think that the whole,
Mm-mm. Agreed. I think I think ultimately what it comes down to for me is like, guys, go to a farm and buy your food. I don't care if they're organic, if they're conventional. I don't care. Go to the farm and buy your food because, like, fresh is best. Whether, whether it was sprayed with an organic insecticide or a synthetic insecticide, or if it was sprayed with an organic fungicide or a synthetic fungicide, like, go to a farm and buy your food. Yep. Yep. 100%. Absolutely. No, man, I appreciate it. I appreciate it very much. Yeah, man, and I gotta say to your audience, I would be willing to bet we share a big audience. Um, I never expected to fall into like the homesteading or gardening niche. Um, but as or I don't like the word influencer, but as a content creator, you slowly but surely figure out what works. And people really enjoy the gardening tips. And it put me into the audience of homesteaders or gardeners and like such a big welcoming group of people. Oftentimes that's not the people offering criticism or anything like that, right? Like, and I just really enjoyed interacting with that audience. Very cool. Sure, sure, sure. I agree. I agree. That's why in the beginning of this, I laid out like the spectrum of agriculture, right? And like you have the person in the apartment with one container and they're growing a pepper or something. And then you have all the way, and I do consider all of that agriculture. Everybody's growing something, some sort of agriculture product on that spectrum, you know? But, well, cool, buddy. Well, I appreciate it. Yes.